Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
V and I are really excited to share this special edition episode with you today. We've got David Tillman on the show. He's a Senior Vice President of Content from WARC, and we're talking about effectiveness, marketing effectiveness. What does that mean? What are the starting points? What are some of the events, especially this New York conference coming up next week? I hope you love the show and stick around for the post-pod.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have David Tillman, the Senior Vice President of Content from WARC, here to chat with us and also host the WARC podcast. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. V and I both have followed a lot of your content and publications, and what we're super excited to have you here for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the big ones is there's this really, I would call it impressive, maybe that's not the right word. Debate. Let's just go with debate around effectiveness, and specifically in relation to an article that Mark Ritson had written towards the end of 2023, kind of calling out North Americans for falling behind on their understanding of the literature around effectiveness. And so I know WARC's mandate and mission is to help educate, provide more tools and ideas, and distribute the effectiveness content more broadly and widely. And so we really want to kind of jump into this topic with you to get your take on it, see what WARC is doing in the short term, and then just kind of explore what's happening in the future as well. So with that, there's WARC itself is part of Ascential, which has a couple other brands that people may have heard of. Things like the Lions Awards, the Cannes Lion Awards. And then there's another brand called Contagious. Do you mind just talking a little bit about those brands and how all these things fit together?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's important to remember that those three brands have sort of come from independent places. So
right.
We're all together under this company called Ascential, which is a UK headquartered company, but it's an international organization. But all three of us have our roots somewhat independently. So Cannes Lions, I'm assuming everybody knows what they are. They're 70 years old. Literally last year was their 70th anniversary. So they've been doing their thing for many years, and then they became part of a group called EMAP, which is a big UK publishing company, which has sort of evolved over time into this thing called Ascential. Mm-hmm. WARC is it's about 30 years old. Not quite as old as Cannes Lions, but in marketing terms, pretty old.
Yeah.
And it started as a print publisher, and then around about the turn of the millennium, it discovered this thing called the internet and pivoted into providing digital information. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in due course, but we became a sort of body of knowledge around marketing, and in particular around marketing effectiveness.
Right.
Contagious is I'm not sure exactly how they describe themselves, but it's sort of a creative, sort of intelligence company. So if WARC is focused on effectiveness, which encompasses, obviously that company's creative effectiveness, but it also looks at things like media and the way the media landscape's evolving. Mm-hmm. Increasingly, we're looking at things like pricing and those sorts of areas as the effectiveness conversation broadens beyond just advertising effectiveness. Contagious is very focused on breakthrough communication, how to get to breakthrough ideas, and then so the three sort of gel quite well. So Contagious and Lions are sort of, if you like, very much at the creative end of the spectrum, and are really in different ways asking how do you get to amazing work that is going to work. And then WARC is a sort of an effectiveness platform.
Right.
So we look at effectiveness across the board, and we do that through our publications in terms of our online publications. We do that in terms of our awards. We do that in terms of advisory services. And increasingly, we're doing that through events as well.
Yeah, and in terms of awards, maybe do you mind just as far as the WARC component, can you just describe what is in the portfolio there as well?
Yeah, sure. So we have a product called the WARC Awards for Effectiveness, which is a global effectiveness competition. We've just rebooted it a few months ago, and that is it's an effectiveness awards, but it's what underpins it is a thing called the Creative Effectiveness Ladder, which is a framework we developed several years ago with a consultant called James Herman, who's based in New Zealand. And we developed this sort of framework to be a sort of, it's not a sort of universal definition, but it's a sort of, the problem we were trying to solve was, particularly in like the effectiveness awards world, there was no actual definition of effectiveness. Like people, we're holding these effectiveness awards, but we can't actually tell you what effectiveness is.
Right.
Yeah. And so we tried to come up with some sort of framework that said, well, look, these are the different effects that advertising can drive or creative communications can drive. Can we put them in some sort of hierarchy from the sort of least commercially significant to the most commercially significant? And then can we build an award scheme around that sort of builds that into the judging? So there is some kind of reflection in the judging of where the sort of commercial significance of the effects you're driving. And that's gone down very well. And I think what's interesting about it, or what's useful about that framework, is it's globally consistent. So it doesn't matter whether you're judging work from, South Africa or Latin America or MENA or Europe or North America or whatever, or Canada, indeed. Yeah. You're trying to judge things against the same standard. And that's something we're very keen to do, because while work can feel different and look different and you've got different brands around the world, what we're trying to get to is the same sort of set of outcomes. We're trying to do the same jobs, I guess, around the world. And we just want to sort of reflect that within the way we approach awards.
Gotcha. Thanks for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So as we, marketing effectiveness, maybe this is more North American, but it feels like it's become a very polarizing topic. And some will believe that this is just the right way of doing marketing. Others are going to say, hey, this is just quote unquote theory based. I'm using air quotes here right now, which, it really creates a skepticism around it. Now, for Mark and I felt like Mark's article really, Mark Ritson's article, sorry, not to confuse with Mark Binkley, but Mark Ritson's article did kind of create this, knee-jerk defensive reactions from marketers across North America. Now, I think there's two ways to kind of look at it. Now, is this about being, you're effective or not? Or is it a debate about continuous learning to make a bigger impact? I'd love to know what your take is on it, or at least how you read Mark's article.
It's really interesting. It's a really interesting question. So look, I think, take a step back. What do we mean by marketing effectiveness? I don't think marketing effectiveness is a single set of theories or ideas. I think when we talk about marketing effectiveness, we're talking about how do we maximize the commercial impact of marketing and marketers.
I like that.
Right.
And that's our sort of starting point. Now, what we've seen over the past decade, and we've been involved in this ourselves, is a steady accretion of a certain set of ideas that are trying to make marketing more evidence-based and trying to explain how this stuff should work and how practitioners, whether that's on the client or the agency side, can start to make better marketing decisions. Now, I think what Mark is absolutely right to highlight is that the center of that discussion and the sort of most active participants within it are not drawn from the world's biggest marketing market, which is the United States. Now, what does that mean? I think that's the sort of question. What does it mean that does it mean that people in the US are not engaging in those ideas? And it's very hard to generalize about a market the size of the US, but and to some degree that's true. I mean, at the top level, of course the most switched on brands, the most switched on agencies are 100% involved in that discussion, that debate.
Right.
How far into the market does that penetrate? I mean, instinctively, I'd say probably not far enough. But I think at the same time, we've got to be careful not to assume that just because there's lots of discussion coming out of the UK and Australia in particular, that those markets are amazingly, that all the marketing that comes out of those places is incredible, and we're going through a golden age of advertising in those markets. We're not. So I think there's a sort of interesting number of ways to look at it, at this particular question. And the starting point is effectiveness is sort of bigger than the sort of collection of theories we're talking about. We can explain why that is. Those theories have come out of certain markets, and the US is a sometimes a surprisingly inward looking market because it's so massive. It can be that the depth to which some of those theories have penetrated is maybe not as high as we'd like, but then at the same time, in the sort of context of the entire history of marketing, these theories are all relatively recent as well. Sure. So long and the short is only 11 years old. The How Brands Grow is sort of 13 years old. I know that was like based on previous findings, but they were very academic findings. So it's a sort of process. And to your point, V, I mean, in terms of, yes, it's about how do we build this into the sort of way marketers are trained in the US? How do we build it into some more the popular consciousness? And how do we find more companies, because they do exist, how do we find more companies in the US that can bang the drum around some of these theories if we think these theories are the right ones to make marketers more commercially impactful?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it's interesting about my take on effectiveness, just to build on what you were saying. Like it's one thing to understand, like, oh, I've done campaigns and they worked. Yeah. It's a different thing to understand why they worked. I feel like, like there's the why component that if you understand that, then you can replicate that more often than not. And I think there's a guy I saw put up a post recently saying something about marketing is art and science. And I still believe that, because we're at the end of the day talking about people, and there's a lot of variability in people, and we're unique in a lot of ways, but we're also very similar in a lot of ways. And so trying to find a way to communicate to a whole bunch of people all at once and drive a commercial impact predictably or with the least amount of risk, I think is kind of where the effectiveness stuff comes into play, because you might get lucky every now and then, but you can reduce the risk and the variability in that luck. And that's kind of the way I see effectiveness working, is it's in a lot of ways like just repetition with these ideas that have worked over and over again and the patterns of consumer behavior. Is that fair?
I think it's absolutely fair. It's a sort of combination between risk management and a sort of insurance policy. There's a slightly bigger question here, which we've been thinking about a lot in the last year or so, which is, I mean, to put it sort of bluntly, what is the future of marketing as a discipline? We had Scott Galloway in Cannes last year, and he sort of jokes about it, but he will tell you that marketers are basically like a certain class of officer in Vietnam that they don't last that long, and actually we're much better all retraining as supply chain professionals, because that's what drives that's what actually drives sort of business and impact and shareholder value. And you sort of laugh about it, and then you think, well, he's got a point in a way in which, like, the big drivers of shareholder growth in the last couple of decades have not come from marketing driven organizations. They've come from technology, they've come from supply chain innovation, and so one of the and I think it is also true that in the US that whole idea of shareholder value, and it's really built into the sort of way managers are trained, leaders are trained. And I think it's easy for us within the sort of, I don't know, the effectiveness discourse, if you like, and I'm using my own air quotes there, to sort of talk about some of the theories, whether it's long and short or mental and physical availability or all of those other sort of that sort of set of things that go with it, as, oh, well, this is the answer to the question. This is the answer to, all marketing's problems. But there's something sort of slightly more fundamental there, where I don't feel that collection of theories is a good enough counter to Scott Galloway's challenge, which is, if you want to get ahead, become, move into supply chain, because that's what's actually driving shareholder value. And I feel like I don't have an answer to this question, but I feel like where we're getting to is arguing about certain principles around marketing and saying, you should know more about this, or you should know more about that, or actually on page 52 of How Brands Grow, there's a chart that shows this. Right. Whereas there's something quite fundamental going on, which is that marketing is being challenged as a source of business value. And I think we need as a collective discipline to really think about that, and think about, well, how do we incorporate some of the, this new learning, this new thinking, and this new understanding about the way marketing can work into a proper counter, into a proper sort of like a sort of mission to improve the quality of marketing, whether that's in the US or indeed worldwide, because those same challenges exist worldwide.
Oh man.
Sorry, that's quite big and quite deep.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say that I think you're right. I think you're right on a lot of those fronts, because we just released an episode with Hannah and Kai. They did a joint study with Capero and the Swedish Advertising Federation.
Yeah,
and they mentioned that marketers are dealing with over 400 KPIs in any given moment. And in a dialogue off the podcast, we were kind of speaking to, like, well, why is it that high? And one of the ideas is it because we're just not feeling as comfortable, and we have all these KPIs to show somehow our effectiveness through one of these lenses, right? And I think it begs a bigger conversation on how do marketers align on maybe some of those key principles to say, foundationally, and I'd love to get your take on this. We have E-share OV, we have the 60-40 based on the long and short of it. We have the reach via the 595 rules. Like, do you believe like there's a certain set of principles that we need to make sure that as marketers, as a marketing community, we're all aligned to help train businesses on our effectiveness?
Well, yes, we do. I don't know if we have them yet. I think we've got lots of good ideas, but we've arguably shot ourselves in the foot by putting so much emphasis on the word brand. Now, I'm going to be honest, we use the term brand, brand building, and all that stuff. We do all the time. But one of the things we've found over the past few years is that brand is a completely loaded word once you leave the marketing department, and we go on about it being such an important thing and how important it is, and then outside of us go, God, they're going on about brand again. I can't believe. Now, I think there is a fundamental disconnect. Now, we were involved in a piece of research. I know you guys have covered this with Roger Martin and the B2B Institute and the promise to the customer. Now, I'm not saying that individually is the answer to everything, but the part of what they were trying to do there is make the language understandable outside the marketing department, and to make it meaningful to a CFO and meaningful to a I don't know, a head of technology or a head of sales. And I think there is something about that. Now, I'm can be optimistic about this, and that I feel we've come a long way, and that actually even in the past few years, we are recognizing this problem with language. We're getting better about it. James Herman did some work with us about, can we talk about current demand and future demand? And then the B2B Institute came up with the 95/5 rule, which I think the 95/5 rule is really, really good. I know it came from Ehrenberg Bass Institute research initially, but I think one of the most powerful, but particularly when it comes to talk about communication rather than the whole of marketing in total, but when it comes to communication, that idea that most people you're talking to are not currently buying, they're not going to be buying regardless of what you do. So the job to do with them is completely different than what you're doing for the 5% or however many it is who are in market. And I think once you understand that principle, and then some of the more basic elements of the sort of how brands grow agenda, you start to realize, well, it starts to make sense why we talk about certain types of activity over certain time frames, and then other types of activity over other time frames. Whether that's a 2-speed marketing agenda or not, or whether, like McDonald's, you try and build platforms that try and link the two up, or there's all sorts of different ways of approaching it. But understanding that that there are two jobs of communication I think is really important, and it's implicit in long and short. They talk about two jobs. They don't quite use that sort of 95/5 phrasing, and it's implicit in mental and physical availability. Byron Sharp will talk about search advertising being a form of physical availability rather than mental availability. So you've got that sense of two jobs, two time frames, and I think I don't think we've got one set of language there, and it doesn't help that many of the participants in the debate like to use their own language, but I think we're getting closer. I'm not sure that counts as a Scott Galloway thing, but I think it gets us closer. But it gets us closer in a communication sense. I think there is a broader sense across the 4 Ps. We can talk about like pricing. Like marketers don't control pricing, yet pricing is a lever of go to market. So there's still a long way to go, but I think if we can at least be clear what we're trying to do around communications, which is still the biggest bit of the budget and the bit marketers still generally control, that helps us. That helps move us forward. I'd just say as an addition to that, and this is a separate piece of work we've been doing, is around what we call culture of creative effectiveness or culture of effectiveness. And it's been a big realization over the past 2 or 3 years that, we know all this, we have all this knowledge. Yes, we can argue about the exact terminology, but we've got a sort of growing consensus around a certain set of, ideas. The blocker is not normally knowledge. It's not necessarily just that people just don't know about it or don't care about it. The blocker is that they do not have internal permission to apply it. So there is not the right level of alignment between the CEO, the CFO, and the CMO that allows you to say, do you know what? We need to be spending a significant amount of money on people who are not currently in market. And that winning that cultural sort of argument, that and getting that alignment is absolutely key before you can do any of the other stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole like higher level. We describe this as the missing link in effectiveness research. It's about building that sort of, how do you sort of make that cultural argument before you can then make the sort of the sort of, you know, investment argument.
It's funny as you mentioned that. So I'm just flashing back to that conversation that we had with Kai and Hannah, and so their survey looked at different perspectives of the marketing department. So from the CFO, from the CEO, from the sales team, from the marketers, and from, I think, agencies as well. Everybody, for the most part, agreed on the role of marketing, building brand awareness, generally speaking. But how you do that was a complete, like everybody had totally different perspectives on that. And so to your point, I think there's preconceived notions. And you say something like brand, that means something to somebody, but it's not always the same thing. And so then that comes with predetermined expectations around what that is. And so it's funny that you're saying this, because I do think there's a gap between the knowledge action gap. I don't know if that's a thing I've seen lots of places, and it's not exclusive to marketing, but it also made me think of Ritson's top 10 marketing bullshit list. And so on that list, sometimes it's easier to define something by what it's not instead of what it is. And so on that list, there's things that I think marketing effectiveness is not. And so it's USP would probably be on there. Brand archetypes would be on there. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to start with why, golden circle from Simon Sinek. Yeah. There's things like that they're popular, or even the funnel. Yeah. You say, you know, brand awareness, and you go top of funnel. We have to build, you know, top of funnel awareness, but there is no funnel. And so, you know, how you go about building awareness is not necessarily through all those things I just described, but it's through something else. And so I think that's the interesting part of effectiveness, the literature and the research. If you were to describe to someone, like, here's 2 or 3 things as a category entry point, if you want to call it that, to marketing effectiveness, like, what are a couple bite-sized pieces of the elements that make up all of the effectiveness literature that you think are good starting places?
So I like 95.5. I think that's a useful way of just thinking about. It also happens to be like a nice heuristic. It's a number, you know, it's a number. It's very easy to sort of, I think that's an interesting starting point. I think the work James Herman has done around current demand and future demand is accessible, and it's deliberately targeted at sort of a startup audience. James is himself a startup founder, and he deliberately wrote that for people who like, particularly in that sort of startup world, need to start understanding how to use communications as part of their brand building. And also generating future demand, I should say, rather than brand building. And then and so I think that's worth looking at if you're new to this space. Clearly, you know, everybody should read How Brands Grow, but you know, it's worth reading the long and the short of it as well, even though you know that Les and Peter revised the thinking several times through subsequent publications. But I think that for me, the real sort of, when I'm trying to sort of when I present the thinking, we as a whole try and summarize it, our starting point tends to be a combination of 95.5, current demand and future demand. There are 2 jobs to do. There's what you need to do for the people who are in the market, and what you need to do for the people who aren't yet in the market. And then you can start layering on more of the nuance. Obviously, you know, you've then got the how brands grow, so penetration. What, you know, why why it's all about light buyers, all those sorts of things. So,
Yeah.
so I think they're the sort of core sort of foundations, and then you can start getting into more nuance. So we are very interested in how a strong brand actually helps performance metrics. So that's where we're then starting to go, well, okay, you know, we can think of these as separate things, but once you understand the principle, you then understand how they can actually come together as well, because that's an important part of starting to make the financial case for brand building or whatever it is actually going to lead to better CPMs from your or better CPAs or cost per sale, or whatever it might be from your performance marketing. So to go back to your question, I think the starting point has to be around consumer and buyer behavior, and then you lay, because that's the foundation, and then you layer on the sort of communications implications.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Feverishly taking notes here.
Yeah, I know. So on that note, I mean, you mentioned earlier the promise to the customer work, which was with Roger Martin and the B2B Institute, LinkedIn. Jan and Mimi, I think, were both contributors to that, as well as yourself.
Yeah,
it was awesome. I actually have been using that a ton.
100%,
because it's so succinct and it's so clever. Like you can start from the promise to the customer and work backwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Roger Martin all over, isn't it?
It's so great. But what other thing? Like, I know you guys are we're going to talk about the Contagious event coming up in a little bit, but I wanted to see if there's anything else that's coming out that you guys are working on that you can sort of preview or chat about, or things that are exciting you.
Oh, wow. So much. So we are, and we'll talk about the event, as you say, in a moment, but we're doing a lot this year, specifically in the US. So we do want to turn the noise up in the US. We sort of said earlier, we do agree that there is a sort of, and to be fair, I think the UK and Australia are sort of the outliers, but rather than the US. But I think we know there's interest. We can see there's a gap in the market. We want to be turning the noise up in the US. So we're doing that through this event that we've got, which we'll talk about. We've also got a series of podcasts we're launching called Marketing Truths, where we take various sort of fundamental principles of communications effectiveness and find US voices who with their own data who can talk about it. So what we're trying to do is make effectiveness seem less like an exotic import. You know, it's not like French cheese or Scottish whiskey or whatever it is. It's actually something that is native to the US market. We've got more coming up there. We're hoping to do a US specific white paper later in the year, which we'll very much be talking to you guys about when that comes up. Other things we're doing, so we're pushing harder on that culture piece I mentioned earlier. So we're doing some original research with the Association of National Advertisers, and that will be a big focus for us, because what we're trying to do is we launched this framework at the end at Cannes last year, where it was called Align, Build, Embed, and it was about how you start to make build that alignment within an organization, and then how you operationalize that. And we do more with the ANA this year to find out, well, where are the actual blockers? If that's a sort of theoretical framework, how's it actually playing out in real life? Where are the blockers? What are the things we can start to unblock? So that's something I'm quite excited about. There's a second round of Promise to the Customer, which we're doing specifically in the B2B space, again with Roger and the B2B Institute. So there'll be more on that. And then we've got our big creative impact moment in Cannes Lions, which is become a big focus for us. WARC has been active in Cannes for many years. Before we were acquired by Ascential, we were acquired by Ascential in 2018, but we've been in Cannes since 2014. presenting effectiveness content. And what we did in 2023 was sort of blow that out. So we've got a co-branded track with our colleagues at Lions called Creative Impact, where what we try and do is we're effectively trying to do is build the world's best effectiveness event within and as part of the world's biggest creative event. So we had some amazing speakers last year. Roger Martin was there. We had Les Binet, Grace Kite. We had Tom Roach, Karen Nelson Field. Quite a bit of a sort of A-list bunch of people,
heavy hitters,
and we get heavy hitters exactly. And then lots of new thinking as well. We also want to use it as a forum for emerging voices and emerging talent as well, and global talent too. So we'll be doing that all again in June, and that becomes quite a lot of what we do. But as any WARC subscriber knows, there's a pretty much constant flow of new research pieces, new sort of what we have a WARC guide series, which looks at a different topic every few months. We have lots of interesting media information coming out all the time. So there's always stuff to talk about. But in terms of like a lot of the big things that are taking a lot of my headspace at the moment, they would be some of them.
Well, we know, so Contagious coming up here, Jan 24th in New York. And
exactly,
Mark and I have spent some time even like in the 2023 Most Contagious report that came out. Absolutely loved that literature. It was incredible. So now it obviously piqued our interest. Like, well, wait a second, there's an event. It's got to be good. So just from your side, if you had to summarize, like, what is the goal for this event, and what would attendees expect from Most Contagious?
Sure. So Most Contagious has been around as an event for several years now. Contagious only became part of Ascential in September. So prior to that, they're an independent company. It's run those events in London and New York for several years. And what they do at the end of each year is they produce this excellent report, Most Contagious, as you say, really, really nice sort of piece that summarizes a lot of the sort of things they've been seeing over the past year. And then the events try and bring that to life. And they've got this great sort of strapline: give us a day, we'll give you a year. And it's really about trying to pull out. I went to the London event in December. It was excellent. They had all sorts of different campaigns on stage, marketers on stage, had some really interesting sort of data points. And it's really about how do we understand the future creativity and the future creative thinking through the lens of the best work that's really out there at the moment. Now, in New York, that event has been a half day rather than a full day. So give us half a day and we'll give you a year, which is even harder. Now, the difference this year, so you see, it's on January 24th. So Most Contagious was a sort of morning event, like 9 o'clock till 1 o'clock. And then they just were going to stop there. And when they became part of the group, part of Ascential, we looked at that and said, well, do you know what? What if we extended that to a full day of content and made the afternoon Creative Impact New York? Now, Creative Impact, as I just mentioned, is this co-branded Lions and WARC event that or track, as it's technically called, that we run in Cannes. But our sort of goal with Creative Impact is for that to become almost like a year-round mission, talking about how we make the case for creative brand building. We want to be doing that all year, not just once a year in the south of France. So we thought, well, actually, that this could be an opportunity to spin out Creative Impact as a concept, as an idea, and bring it to life in an individual market. So we thought, well, okay, let's do it. Let's do Creative Impact New York. the moment, like pretty much the moment we agreed that internally, the day later, Mark Ritson's column came out about sort of US marketers falling behind and yeah. So I was like, well, this is good timing. So yeah. So I mean, obviously we in the initial sort of the initial sort of buzz, we sort of frame this as, well, Mark, look, by happy coincidence we're doing this event.
It's amazing.
But actually, I mean, it's deep than that. It's not just a tactical thing for us. This is about turning up the noise in New York, about bringing creative impact out of Cannes and into a sort of year-round program. And again, you know, in Cannes we feature really strong research, but we also have access to the great, you know, the CMOs and then the agency teams that put things together, and we try and build a content program that has that's something for everyone. That's not quite true, but I think, you know, if we take our own advice, if we're going to grow the market for effectiveness, we need to be appealing to light buyers as well as the hardcore, the heavy buyers, the sort of the loyalists, if you like. So what we mean by that is, if all we do in these events is talk about hardcore researchy stuff, that's great. I mean, I'd love that. I'm sure you guys would love that, but we're going to have 100 people in a room, you know, debating furiously. Whereas if we want to sort of bring in, actually open this up to a broader audience within marketing, people who have maybe not been that exposed to the theory or know a little bit about it, but think that's just the job of the strategists, then we need to talk about it in slightly different ways. So yes, we want the research, we want that sort of real rigorous theoretical underpinning, but we also want to be learning about how amazing brands have put that into practice, or about how strategists and creatives have combined to apply some of the thinking and have got to much better outcomes. So that's kind of what we're doing with the event in New York. We've got some great speakers. Awesome. We've got like the research, we've got the IPA coming over with Adam Morgan and Orlando Woods and Elizabeth Paul from the Martin Agency in the States. And then we've got people like Mark Pollard, who runs a Sweathead community. He's going to be talking about ideas and how ideas get stuck and how you can unstick them with Lexi Perez and Grace Gordon. So, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff on. We've got Morgan Flatley, who's a global CMO of McDonald's. You know, she's going to be talking about their sort of creative led revival. So it's a real sort of mix, and it should be a great, it should be a great afternoon of after what will be a fantastic morning where Contagious have talked about, breakthrough thinking and lots of cool new ideas.
I love that. I love I was just thinking about like our, the entry point for a lot of effectiveness is $5.95. And then the sticking point being, how do you implement a creative culture? It sounds like it's almost like you're designing this based off of those two principles as well, which is smart.
Yeah. I wish I could say we'd done that. We'd sat in a room and that was a strategy. It's just sort of the way it's come out.
Fell into place.
Maybe I think we've just absorbed enough of the literature that we've done it instinctively. But no, but that is it. And I think actually we've learned a lot by working with our friends at Lions, because what Lions do brilliantly is, either you've been to Cannes, but it's a huge show. It's enormous, and it has all parts of the spectrum there. So they're very attuned to thinking, well, how do we make this interesting for 1,000 people rather than 100?
Right.
And obviously what we're then bringing is, well, look, we know the players, we know the people, we know the theory, we know the ideas, and what we want to do is make those as interesting and as popular as possible. So I think together it's worked quite well. It's worked as a nice sort of combination.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. It's going to be a great show. We'll definitely put a link in to the show for that, or the show notes for that, as well as all the work, or at least a website link for the WARC website, which is a really great gateway into all kinds of stuff, including the podcast and the papers. And the creative effectiveness work from James as well. So we'll put all that stuff in there, but this has just been awesome to kind of chat with you. I'm really appreciative of your time for sure to talk about all this.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. It's great.
Yeah, so do we. I mean, it's one of those things where I think V and I both are like, there's some common problems for a lot of marketers, which is like CMO tenure is short. Yeah. And a lot of people still trying to figure out which half of my marketing is working. And I think, those are just good starting points to try and think of. And there's a lot of evidence out there that is available and accessible. And I just applaud you guys for all the work that you've been doing on making that information more available.
Thank you. Yeah. And you too. I love the podcast. So, the more we can have in this merry band of effectiveness advocates, the better.
Apostles. Yeah. Make it sound like a cult.
Well, do you know what? I've thought this myself. There is a sort of cultish, and actually, it's a serious point here because I think it's something to some degree we need to get away from, and that there are cultish tendencies to this debate. There are, the sacred texts and I was just going to say a slightly weird tangent, but I spent, before I knew what marketing effectiveness was, I did a master's in early medieval history and learned a lot about the weird fights people would have over the date of Easter. You can believe that, there would be, people were being excommunicated for getting the wrong day for Easter. And then that comes to mind every now and then when we start talking about differentiation versus distinctiveness, or stuff. Yeah. It's a bit, all right. It's a bit like that Easter thing again.
I kind of agree. If I'm honest, you're either in or you're out. There's no halfway in there, right?
There's no halfway. No.
Yeah.
This has been
awesome. That's awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks again, David. This is great. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Just before we get to the post-pod with V and I'd like to take a second and just ask to see if you could leave a review. We are always looking for ways to make this show better and really love your feedback.
Post-pod. Let's go.
Okay, you start out.
So fantastic conversation around effectiveness with David Tillman from the SVP there of WARC. And I think what I love most about this is it felt like a lot of the challenges that we have marketers have is widespread, and it's not just here in North America. It's everywhere. And I think that for me, when I try to compartmentalize it and think, well, what is the nuance here that we're all struggling with? I think it comes down to that question that we had around, like, well, do we have some foundational principles that we need to align on to say, like, hey, here's like step one. And I liked his differentiation there where he's talking about the consumer behavior or the consumer buyer behaviors principles. You kind of use those foundationally first, and then you start building on all the nuances. Right. But I also wanted to take this opportunity because I wanted to ask you, if you're looking at like all the principles that we're aware of, how would you approach it? If you were to select, say, those two or those three that you need to start here and then you progress, what would be your choice? Because he said PDTC, the 595 rule, and the current demand versus future demand. I know that may be more startup led, but I'd love to know what your three were.
Yeah, for me, I would start with promise to the customer. And so my reasoning for that is, first of all, I love the language of it.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge in a way. So it creates an opportunity for dialogue.
Yeah.
So normally marketing teams go, they take orders in a lot of cases of like, we got to get this offer in the market. We have to focus on this. Or in some cases, the marketing team may say, well, we're going to run a brand campaign. And then there's a creative idea that gets pitched out there. And how do you evaluate that?
Yeah.
Who knows? So for me, no matter what the opportunity is to create something in market. And we know the majority of marketing, the responsibility of marketers is around campaign development.
Yep.
The promise to the customer language is, and the concept and the study and all that kind of stuff, for me, is a really, really practical starting point to bring in different teams and people, because to make a promise to the customer, it's a very clearly defined process and what needs to be included. Like, it has to be memorable, it has to be valuable, it has to be measurable. So then once you have that, you need to like go around to like the logistics team or the purchasing team and go, this is the promise we've all agreed to. Can we deliver on it?
Right.
And so then all of a sudden you create this idea around, like, without even knowing physical and mental availability, you're creating a conversation around the principles of physical and mental availability, as opposed to just saying, oh, we need top of mind awareness.
Yeah.
So for me, that would be the first starting point. And embedded in that then is like the current feature demand, the 595 stuff. The long and short of it is a big component of that. It's how brands grow, I think, is an amazing series of books. I love the Amber Fast stuff, but it's not easy to consume.
No.
Like, it's a really heavy, it's a difficult read, because they're concepts that are not impossible to understand by any stretch, but they're just A, different than what we believe a lot of times, and then B, it's a lot of evidence science kind of literature.
Yeah.
So they're not, it's not pablum. You know what I mean? It's not a meme.
It's not a meme. No, definitely not a meme.
Yeah. So for me, the 595, the promise to the customer is like where I would start with all that. How about you?
I love that you went there in the context. Like, I have become a huge believer on PTTC, and I'm with you in that is 100%. Like, it should be the foundational principle that you kind of look at any campaign from, and anything that you want to do, essentially. And I would also agree, the 595, the 60/40, et cetera, become like byproducts of that. I would add category entry points there. I think that's very important. Yeah. It's a very important part of actually developing a product based on the needs of the consumer, but also like finding the right category entry points that you can build off of a promise that you're trying to make to that customer. So I think those ones are really closely linked. And maybe selfishly here, I also love ESOV. Mind you, that's probably a little bit further away, so it comes back to the measurement and kind of a little bit, little bit on that side. But I would say like PTTC, the category entry points, if I'm almost kind of going sequentially, then who you're targeting. So the 5 versus the 95/5 rule, your budget becomes a 60/40, and then measurement from an ESOV perspective is kind of like how I would approach it.
Yeah, I think those are great. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm also thinking about, okay, so promise the customer, need to talk to store operations and logistics,
right,
and product development. 595 and ESOV, for that matter, you need to talk to the executive team, but for sure the CFO.
Yeah,
and then
totally better talk to him or her. Sorry.
Yeah, and then what was the third one you said, or fourth one you said?
60/40, the budget split.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's basically all those same people, but it facilitates conversations, with other people, and kind of gets to that how component that we talked about with Kai and Hannah.
Yeah,
and I think that's interesting. And really, you may need to bring in somebody to be sort of that change agent that you can shoot a messenger if you don't like the message,
that's true.
Because if you bring somebody in internally to be that change agent, that actually may backfire on that person, because for all the things that have been said over decades about marketing and talking about why it's not about the golden circle, why it's not about hierarchy, like Maslow's hierarchy. It's not about brand archetypes. It's not about a unique selling proposition. that could backfire if you're the employee working inside of an organization.
Totally. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's more here. Just kind of thinking about and compartmentalize some of the principles to make them easier for marketers to follow. But, overall, like I think our conversation with David really kind of showcased the opportunity that exists for commonality. I know Jeff talked about GAMP, generally agreed upon marketing principles. I kept thinking about that during our conversation with
same
David.
Here. That's Jeff Lowe.
Jeff Lowe, yeah.
Yeah, we can put an episode link in there too.
Yeah. So that's really exciting, and I'm very, very envious of those who will be able to attend that event, because it sounds
totally
like if you had to do one event, one day only, this would have to be it, 100% from a marketing perspective.
For sure. Yeah, and there's the creative effectiveness ladder that we talked a little bit about for sure in this conversation, but you and I don't think have talked about that very much. It might be worth a conversation. Will definitely be worth a conversation at some point. But I think there's a lot of stuff in there too, and I know it's part of the promise to the customer report. So if anybody's listening that wants to look more for some of these things, if you just start with that promise to the customer report, you'll get access to a lot of this material.
Yeah.
And it's not a meme by any means, but it's a really good starting point to see a lot of the language and a lot of the literature and the reference links and all that kind of stuff.
Totally.
For all this other stuff. Yeah, that was great to have David on. I appreciate what they're doing, and
me too,
and all the content they're publishing. And I mean, at the end of the day, I keep thinking about effectiveness. I'd love to get your take on what that means. What do you think it means?
For me, when I think about marketing effectiveness, is just our ability to ensure that we can maximize the spend that we have in the most effective way, driving value for our business. And the value for our business can be different for every organization. It could be driving orders, it could be driving revenue, it could be whatever that is. So fill in the blanks here, listeners. But for me, it's just, how do we maximize our efficiency with the dollars that we have available to us to drive the best outcome for our organizations? That's the way I would define it, rooted in marketing principles. So I think that's the way I would define it. How about you?
Yeah, I love analogies. So I've been trying to think about this one for a long time. I keep thinking about sports.
Okay.
Since both of us are cyclists, I'll go with this one.
Okay.
So in what's that guy's name? Tom Simpson? He was the guy that died in the Tour de France.
Oh yeah.
He's the guy that said, "Put me back on my bike."
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
So I think he was British too, actually. So it was getting the dates wrong, but 70s-ish, 60, 50, 67, somewhere in that
somewhere there.
Before the 2000s.
Let me look it up.
Yeah. So, but part of what I read a book about this guy, and part of what happened was that at the time, what was normal was people were doing rudimentary doping tactics, like painkillers. The belief at the time was the fuel you consumed was rice water, I think.
And beer.
Like a porridge almost. At the bottom of a climb, like going up Ventoux, they would stop at the bars and the restaurants and pubs and like do shots of tequila or whiskey or whatever, just to numb the pain before they did these climbs. And so that, and the other idea was, it was before people thought, they used to think water just made you heavy. So they didn't drink water, which is fucking crazy. Like if you think about it. So, and then fast forward like to the Lance Armstrong era, there's that one guy, I forget his name, but he had something like 19 bottles of water. Is the other American guy that ended up having this miraculous comeback and crushed it. Turns out he was doping, but like, so there's a dramatic change over a period of time from a principle around what was effective in terms of the way you fueled and trained and managed your hydration and stuff all throughout a race from one point in time to the next. So to me, that's what a marketing effectiveness is. It's really just about applying more scientific principles based on things we've learned to the work that we're doing in front of us. And so a lot of it is the marketing effectiveness material, to me, is more like the kind of fuel that we do. It used to be like carbo loading, right? And now it's not about carbo loading at all. And so to me, that's like the fuel. And then putting into practice is a whole other thing, to David's point. But I think about it a lot like that in terms of a sport analogy. Bigger, faster, stronger. How do you get there? How do you do it the right way? And all those kinds of things, and do it predictably. Yeah. Repeatedly. There's a lot of, repeatedly. Yeah. I think there's some analogies there. If we think about our own role as like a sports performance.
I like that.
As opposed to just like, you're effective or not, you're right or wrong. If you don't know effectiveness, then you don't know anything. Like, the debate, the cult thing that you talked about. Yeah, it's not about that.
For those following, Tom Simpson passed away July 13th, 1967. It was and it was the 13th stage of the Tour de France of that year, as he was preparing to ascend Mont Ventoux.
Yeah, like he died on the way up. It wasn't like he went off the cliff and died. Like, no, he was like, his heart just failed because he was, it's crazy. But I love the analogy of it being almost be like the marketing principles will become like almost like your fueling stations or your fueling strategy, if you will, right? On those long endurance events, because I think the analogy does really well in that idea. It's like, if you think about endurance sports, the durations, like marketing in of itself it's a long-term play. It's not a short-term play. I think that ties in really well. Look at you, man. Jesus. So good. So good. Anyway, V, that was fun. That was great. It was a good chat for sure. Yeah, it was awesome. What's next for you? What's next for me? Well, this week actually happens to be, I suppose. Yeah. Well, I have a meeting coming up now. No, this is a doubleheader week. So we're racing two podcasts this week. Triple, actually. Actually, now you mentioned it. 2 interviews, but then we have That's right. Yeah. But we're releasing 2. Yeah, we're releasing 2 episodes. So this is coming out Tuesday, January 16th, and then we will have our typical Barber's Brief later in the week there on Thursday. So excited to do that. But what I'm most excited about is the guest lineup that's coming. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Do we share? It's up to you. I'm let excited you to just listen. No, you go. Yeah, go. Go ahead. Well, next week we have Christine Gillis. Yeah, Christine Gillis. That conversation for me, I don't know if she doesn't like hoodies or what it was, but it was such an incredible hoodie conversation, because she said to my face she would never hire me, which is an incredible way to start a podcast. So I just absolutely loved it. Yeah. She's great. So we had that one, and the recording that we're doing tomorrow was with Grace Kite, one of the heavy hitters that we just talked about. So bring Grace back. Love it. Yeah. So there's lots of things to look forward to. It's gonna be really great. Can't wait for it, man. Can't wait for it. Yeah. Okay, V. Until next time. Go chase profitability. Why did I pause? What is wrong with me? That's like my thing. Jesus. All right, buddy. We'll talk to you soon. See you, man.